Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement before we jump into our pre-recorded interview with Peter Singer. Layer 8 is going virtual. The conference will be held on Saturday, June 6th. Security Weekly listeners save $20 off their ticket by visiting layer8conference.com and using the promo code Security Weekly before selecting your ticket type. Please consider supporting Layer 8 or one of their partner organizations. When you purchase your ticket, you're able to donate to one of their partner charitable organizations. Excuse me. Some of the Security Weekly team will be in our own channel on the Layer 8 Discord server, answering questions and possibly doing some contests. In this pre-recorded segment, we had the pleasure of talking with Peter Singer. He's a strategist and senior fellow at New America and the author of a very recently released book called BurnIn, a novel of the Real Robotics Revolution. To receive a copy of the book at a discounted price, please visit 800ceoread.com/Security Weekly. I have just started listening to the book in audio format, and I am already completely engaged, and I can't wait to see how it turns out. I'm probably like 10 or 15 minutes into listening to the book. It was a great interview with Peter. He is a sci-fi nerd, much like myself and many others on the show, and we had a lot of fun talking about his book, which ties in a lot of sci-fi elements, but also real-world examples of technology in a fictional work. So I will, with that, bring you our interview with Peter Singer. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Mr. Lee Neely and Matt Alderman are here with me for this segment. I would like to introduce Peter Singer. He's a strategist at New America. He's been named by the Smithsonian as one of the nation's 100 leading innovators, by Defense News as one of the 100 most influential people in defense issues, by Foreign Policy to their top 100 global thinkers list, and as an official mad scientist, love that, for the U.S. Army's Training and Doctrine Command. He joins us here today on the show to talk about BurnIn, a novel for the Real Robotic Revolution, released on May 26th, and how it's kind of a new novel plus non-fiction. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, it's wonderful to have you. I love science fiction, and I love technology being blended into science fiction. Some of my favorite novels, and I think many of our listeners and hosts fall in that category as well. So, Peter, what prompted you to write this book, and give us kind of a brief synopsis?
Sure. So it sounds like it's exactly up your alley. So BurnIn, the title of it's taken from the engineering concept of when you deliberately push a new technology to the breaking point to try and learn from it. You think about, to make a movie reference, when you play the stereo to 11 to see how long you can do it before it breaks, or a new watch, how far underwater before it cracks, that sort of thing. So that's what a BurnIn is. And BurnIn is a new kind of book. It's a smash up of fiction and nonfiction. So it's a technothriller. It follows a hunt for a terrorist through Washington, D.C., a couple years into the future. But it also packs into it over 300 explanations and predictions of everything from how does AI work to what are some of the looming cybersecurity threats that we have to figure out. So it's a novel but with footnotes. So it brings these two things together. And it sounds like a little bit like for you, it's for myself, it was scratching two different itches. It's I want to teach, I want to share. So this reflects a multi-year research project, but also I want people to enjoy, and I've got that creative side. So I'm a dad. I think of it in a lot of ways of sneaking veggies into the smoothie.
Very nice. It's interesting how those of us, we were chatting before the segment, we're very much science fiction fans, and how we look at artificial intelligence. And I think we kind of get, to me, my opinion is we're a little spoiled to think that autonomous humanoid robots are going to be walking around us talking like Data on Star Trek. Where do you fall in the, like, explaining that to both our audience and perhaps in the book as to like where we're going to be at certain points in time with artificial intelligence coupled with robotics?
Yeah, so even the title itself goes back to it. So the subtitle of the book is a novel of the real robotic revolution, and it's a little bit of a play on the fact that I think we get that wrong. We're on the 100-year anniversary of the literal creation of the word robot itself. And it was in one of the earliest works of science fiction, a play and then a book called RUR. And from that point, back in 1920, all the way through to Terminator, Matrix, whatever, the story of robot, the way we think about it, is almost always some kind of mechanical servant that wises up and then rises up, kill all humans, right? And the reality is, as you well know, is it's not that around us. Rather, it's more like a technology or an industrial revolution. In many ways, if you think about AI, but also the hardware side of robotics, it's playing out more like what happened when we got the steam engine or when we got computers. They matter. They change the economy. They change security. They change family relationships. And the same thing is playing out here. And so going back to that concept of the book of bringing together fiction and nonfiction, is that whenever there is a technology in the book, no matter how crazy it might seem, we actually have a footnote to show how it's real. So if it's two characters talking and a 6-rotor delivery drone is off in the distance, well, it then has the footnote to that's Amazon's patent for it. Or when there's a certain problem with the robotic system, one of the things we're seeing play out with AI right now is the idea of algorithmic bias, when it gives you a bum steer because it was designed badly or it's pulling from the wrong set of data. Well, we actually have a reference to the academic study on it, but also you use a cool scene to illustrate that concept. So one scene is the police are hunting for a bad guy in a crowd at a train station, and they're getting all of this information coming from face recognition, background data, and the like. But it also is kind of giving them, it's steering them towards a certain set of individuals that may not be the actual bad guy.
Peter, in your research, how far back did you trace artificial intelligence research, AI research?
So we actually take it back to the very start, and we use actually conversations between some of the characters to give people that background of everything from where the very words come from, the very terms. They date back to these. Actually, they were like summer retreats done by university professors back during the early days of the Cold War, to playing with some of the concepts of how we've thought of the role that AI might play in our lives. Gary Kasparov's idea of a centaur and the like. So we actually use conversations between the characters as they talk about it, as they argue about it, to illustrate that. But then you build in, these big Hollywood scenes, and kind of, cinematic of the types of problems that loom, particularly on the cybersecurity side. So what are the new crimes that we might see as we move more and more into a world of not just AI, but IoT? crimes that are not just merely about stealing information, but creating changes of information. And that gives them a physical effect. So it might be going after a vulnerability in a smart home. And now you can literally cause arson, kill someone through digital means, or it might be going after a smart city. And not to plot spoil, but our bad guy is basically holding an entire city hostage through primarily digital means. And so we play that out. But again, every time that something happens, you have that footnote to, okay, here's where this kind of breach already occurred, or here's where someone showed it off at a hacker convention that they could do this. This is a real type of vulnerability.
Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
So when you use the term BurnIn, I was reminded back in the 80s when I created a BurnIn desk for PCs we were building, and we had a bunch of things we did designed to exercise them and make sure they would perform as designed, essentially stress tests. And I'm thinking, roll that forward into the robot analogy. How do you make sure that you're going to do what they said, like you said, of trying to detect problems? I'm not thinking you could pen test one, but I mean, how do you exercise everything in there? Is that possible? Is that even real?
Well, so one of the things is the very idea is right now we're sort of putting society through a burn-in. We're pushing out technology and usages and then just learning from their failure. Frankly, it's one of the things that it was already in trend before, the pandemic, and it's even more so after, where, we're pushing out whether it's robotic delivery systems, cleaning systems, to AI surveillance of a type that a lot of people didn't think would ever be possible inside the US. We're pushing it out there. So we're right now kind of going through a society level burn-in. But we also have the idea of that's what the character in the book is, that it's taking a system that's been designed and now they're doing a field test and they're trying to learn from what works and what doesn't work and what will fail or not. But what you've asked also hits one of the key themes in the book, but also kind of a theme that, for society that we have to figure out, is this double meaning of the concept of trust. So for, most of us, when we think about trust, it's kind of a moral thing. I like you, I trust you. But for, people in the sciences and engineering, trust is really about, does it work in a predictable manner? So for example, I can trust that you're going to lie to me all the time. I can predict that, and then you may not be trustworthy, but you're predictable. And it's the same thing when we think about our systems. And so much of the book is playing with which kind of trust matters to us most, and how we not only relate to each other, but also to our machines. And in turn, how do the machines understand and predict us? And again, going back to what was talked about before, these used to be really sci-fi things, right? How does a human and a machine partner up? How do they understand each other? How do they predict each other? Well, we've got that going on in real world. So it gives you a lot of fun things to play with in fiction. But then you also have the bad guy side, right? Whether we're talking about fictional bad guys or real world, one of the key things they go after is not just the technical vulnerability, they go after that sense of trust, right? And that makes what they do even more impactful, even more scary, whether it's in the fiction or when we think about real world risks.
It makes it interesting to think about voice assistants in that context, Peter, as you were talking, right? I go back to the scene in Star Trek, where Scotty's trying to talk into the mouse, and I remember watching that going, wow, someday we'll be able to talk to our computers. And now that we can, I'm like, wow, I really don't want to talk to my voice assistants because they're just terrible at so many things. And then it's the question of trust. How do I know if it's recording me or not, right, is the big question that people outside of technology now are starting to ask. How much do you trust your voice assistants?
Yeah, so we play with that in a lot of different ways. One is there's a scene where they're interacting with voice sensor like that, but it's a scene of stress, right? So it's one thing where we can talk slow and deliberately, but what about if it's in the middle of, say, a firefight, a gun battle? How does it react to that? You also have the idea of, and this again, we see it already with our Siris and Alexa and the like, where do we start to put our human emotions and identity on top of technical devices, right? So when my voice system doesn't get it right, I get mad at it. It's the same thing as getting mad, though, at my refrigerator, or getting mad at my car. But I'm getting mad at, Alexa, no, come on, Alexa, get it. Stop screwing around, right? And so one of the things that we also play with in the book is, at the center of it is this FBI agent and the new robotic system they're working with. It's basically taking, Alexa and Siri and moving it forward. But both that character, but also you, the reader, kind of can't help yourself from starting to put emotion, putting character on top of it, even though they keep telling themselves, it's just a machine. And it in the book, it's just a machine. And yet you can't help but feel emotion towards it. And so it also kind of plays with that too.
So, Peter, one of the things you touched on a little bit as we've been going through this is the importance of data in provenance of data, right? Because if you think about feeding a robotic system or an artificial intelligence system with misinformation, how do machines react in those kind of scenarios that aren't predictable? I know you've done some other things around data manipulation and things like that in other books. Do you play with that here? Because that concept of data and the data input into these systems are also critical in how they potentially react, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So, you can go after this in a couple of ways. The first is it may be fed bad data or biased data unintentionally. And, there are certain scenes in the book where this happens. I don't want to plot spoil too much, but, we're already seeing real world versions of that where, for example, we've had companies that are using, machine learning for everything from determining who is eligible for loans to certain treatments for heart disease. And even though no one said, I want to design a racist AI, it was actually generating racist recommendations because it was pulling from a set of data that was not diverse enough. So, for example, on the loan side, it was not giving loans. The recommendation was not giving loans to people of a certain ethnicity. No one told it to do that, but it was an outcome from it. So first issue, we've got just bad data or biased data going in. Second issue is, as you laid it out, deliberately feeding bad information. And we've seen that affect everything from, our democracy and how we think about things playing out on social media. And there's an element of that in the book. And what does that look like 5-10 years from now as we see AI advance further? But also you can do that as a way of causing kinetic effect. That is, if we think about hacking into a system, causing a breach, you might be trying to extract information, or you might make just a very subtle shift in the data, feed it bad sensor data, make it think that the river level is at 9 feet when it's really at 7 feet. And just by feeding it bad data, you can then cause a kinetic effect. You can cause the flood management system to activate even though it doesn't need to activate. Oops, I just did another plot spoil. For anyone who wants to get a sense of what that would look like in reality, Google Washington, D.C., 1936 flood. And you'll see some pretty amazing imagery that you might be able to cause through digital means. And then there's a final part of data that, again, is a real world, but also a really creepy sci-fi issue to figure out, is who controls all that data, who accesses it, and is that in the hands of government? Is it in the hands of business? This is a major debate right now. What happens as we move forward and you get a scale of data that makes today look like the old discs of old?
Yeah, it's that trust multiplied, right? It's not only trust of the system, but it's trust of the data that's feeding the system. You have to trust kind of both at the end of the day, because either one of those could create a non-trust scenario.
Exactly. And what does that scenario look like in our real world? How do people react to when someone's picking away at the elements of trust? When I say people, this is the great thing that you can do in fiction, is that you can have certain characters represent the different parts of society. So what does that look like? How does a senator react to it? How does a FBI agent react to it? How does her husband, who's doing remote work now because he lost his job timely, react to it? How does their 5-year-old kid react to it, right? Different ways of coming at it. How does it affect the way not only we react to that specific moment, but what does it do to our worldview? And then in turn, what are the kind of political issues and controversies that pop up? Think of all the stuff that's on our radar screen right now that wasn't in the last election. So what does it look like in the next time around?
So I had on the bad data front, I was thinking, as you're describing the things we could worry about, I think part of the bad data is could also be considered people retraining the AI as to what a particular word is. Most commonly, my Echo device will respond to words that I don't think are her name, but somebody's trained it, that's her name. I'm wondering, what does that do to the equation when you have people retraining the AI to misunderstand?
Yeah, and there's a series of sort of funny scenes in it of the main character, who's a Marine veteran, who's now at FBI. She's been assigned to work with this new robotic system that's basically sort of the next gen of Siri or Alexa or whatever. And there's all of the ways that it's been designed by the company to interface with humans. And she's got to retrain it to what she wants. And sometimes it's because, that's inefficient. In the middle of a firefight, I don't need you saying my full name or that sort of things. And then other times it's just her personal preference. And it also means and going back to what we're talking about data, it's reactive, it's learning. And sometimes it learns things from her that she doesn't want it. And again, this goes back to how we think about our machines. Are they partners? Are they servants? Are they like our kids that are kind of learning around us, where they actually learn things from us and we're like, no, I didn't want you to do that, right? And these, again, it's so fun because they're sci-fi and yet, we're all starting to deal with it. We all have to figure out how to wrestle with it.
It makes you, think of the question, like, you program the AI and you as a human are telling it what's good, what's bad, right? To put it in the most generic terms I could think of. But as it evolves, people can influence by the data coming in to change its mind as to what's good and what's bad. And that's really the kind of one of the huge dangers with AI.
Yeah. And again, this is something that will be true of a higher level of AI, but it will also be something that will play out in your own critical infrastructure system, in your own home. Because remember, it's not just how you individually are training and trying to influence, it's also the larger network that it's pulling back from. So on the positive, someone else might train it to do something that you never would have thought of. And you're like, ooh, that's a really good thing. Or it might figure out an efficiency by pulling from, 10,000 of its own version. But then there's the flip side where you'll be like, yeah, that's not what I wanted. That's not how I hoped it to be. Yes, that may work for 10,000 other people, but that's not how I want to interact with it. And so you're going to always have that kind of exchange. But then let's put on our bad guy hats. And there's also someone who will want to manipulate that. And it might be the individual level manipulation, causing it to do some kind of damage or something like that. Or it might be someone going after scale. And again, everything that we're talking about here, you could have this discussion around Silicon Valley futures in general, but you could also have a very sci-fi element to it. And so what we tried to do in BurnIn is bring in the different insights. So we interviewed everything from FBI agents to people work in cybersecurity for water systems to AI scientists, and we tried to kind of learn from them, but then play it forward in a scenario that hopefully people will find is kind of a good escapist read.
Peter, you said the book is placed a few years into the future. When do you think some of this comes to reality, right? I mean, this is sci-fi and it's based off of science, but how many years till this potentially becomes reality for us? Do you have a timeline?
It's interesting because we gave ourselves a tougher challenge, in that we operated under what I call the no vaporware rule. So whenever any hardware or software appears in the book, a thing, a device, a type of cyber attack, it has to already have happened or already be in development stage. So it has to already have a patent or something like that, to give an illustration. It certainly makes it a lot harder from the writer's standpoint. It'd be a lot easier if you could just, wave your hands and he pulled out the magic MacGuffin and everything was solved. Or you think about, cybersecurity, movies and TV. He just went clickety clack and he got in the system, right?
Or if it's Star Trek, it's the tachyon pulse, right? That solves so many problems. And just tachyon pulse, we're good.
Oh man, whoever first discovered the tachyon pulse should get rights from everyone. Was it Captain Archer? I honestly can't remember, but they should have renamed it. Forever did that. It certainly created a lot harder. But so it goes to your question in that it means that the timeline is not one that's 50 or 100 years out. It's closer to that. Now, the second thing that came out of it is some of the systems actually have been accelerated by everything that's happened over the last several months. So think about it this way. These trends were already in place. Automation, AI, remote work, you name it. But then in a matter of weeks, we had, an entire generation of kids suddenly do remote learning at a scale no one ever thought possible. Same thing for remote work. If you more specific applications, like there's a scene in a hospital in the book, telemedicine, we did a scale that most people didn't think would happen for 10 years, suddenly was put in place in a couple of months. Same thing in policing, surveillance, face recognition. Again, a lot of things were accelerated. And to give you like a more minute example of that, in the very opening scene of the book, the characters are starting to, they've got a report of a bad guy, a suspected terrorist in a crowd at DC's Union Station, a train station in DC. And as they're going into it, just in the background, a seemingly futuristic delivery bot drives down the sidewalk. We have the footnote to the company that's working on that system. That delivery bot was deployed actually to deliver groceries in Washington, D.C. just about a week before you and I are speaking. So it seemed like this kind of futuristic thing. and it's already here. And to give a reference to someone who's great in sci-fi, but also looking at the real world, it's the Gibson concept of the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. That's a little bit of what we look at in the book. So for some people, they'll recognize things today, and there'll be other elements of that it's not yet for 5 years. We don't put a hard date on it, which allows the reader to sort of escape into it.
Peter, what are your primary influences in terms of science fiction of any kind?
Oh wow, you've hit a couple of them. I am a Star Trek person. Actually, that's been my escapism during all of this. I'm rewatching Enterprise and Deep Space Nine, kind of peppering back and forth between them. Garrick is the best. On the written side, Gibson is an example. So those are kind of the ones that I'm drawn towards. A fun thing I'm doing right now, I've got kids. We're watching for them the first time the Star Wars movies. As a sort of a funny aside, we watched Empire Strikes Back, and I told them, look, I had to wait 3 years to find out if Darth Vader really was Luke's dad, so I'm going to make you wait 3 days.
Oh man!
But yeah, those just give a hint of some of the influence. But I think I'm a little more drawn to the grittier ones. So from the Star Treks that I referenced, I hope people don't hate me, but I prefer the Deep Space Nine Enterprise versus original. I like it when the things don't work out as planned. I like it when people are bad, including some of the characters that you like, or they make mistakes. And because I think that's more realistic. And so that's what we've tried to play with in our own work, is that it's a world where, yes, there's robotics, yes, there's AI, but it doesn't always work. And oh, by the way, there's a bad guy out there trying to make sure it doesn't always work.
Right.
Lee?
I was going to say, so you probably like things not going right in Rogue One. We just had 9 consecutive
big debate as to whether that is. I have a tough time with whether that's the best overall Star Wars movie or not between Empire.
I'm the more I watch Rogue One, the higher up on my list it goes, and I've actually just started, almost finished that with my kids recently, and I'm like, it is a really strong offering in the Star Wars canon for sure.
I don't know if I'm emotionally ready to say that it's better than Empire, but it's really good. But also it's an incredibly adult movie, so I think that might be part of it.
Agreed. The AI in the robot that I can't remember the robot's name in Rogue One, but it was an Imperial droid, right? And the personality that they built into that droid character is astonishing. The more I go back and watch it, I'm like, whoever wrote the lines, the wittiness that they built into an AI robot is just amazing.
Yeah.
And entertaining.
And it's of course, the part of it's because, if I recall correctly, it's from another undervalued sci-fi movie. It's the voice is one of the characters from Serenity. So okay, it's if I recall correctly, it's the pilot from Serenity, which is another. You've got space travel, but guess what? People still cuss.
Yes,
that sort of thing.
Yes.
As in Serenity, as in I'm a Leaf on the Wind.
Yes.
The blonde guy.
Yes.
K2SO.
K2SO, yes, is the droid in Rogue One. Yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome. More questions for Peter?
I'm good.
I'm looking forward to reading the book now. You got me excited.
Yeah, that's
Thank
awesome.
you very much.
I agree. Tell us a little bit about the cybersecurity in the book, Peter. What were your influences there, and what are some kind of teasers for those of us that work in security?
Yeah, so I mean, that's I'm someone who've worked in this field as well. Did a series of books both on the traditional cybersecurity side, a book called Cybersecurity and Cyber War, What Everyone Needs to Know. And then more recently, a book called Like War that looked at the social network weaponization aspect. And and have done consulting with everything from Fortune 500 companies to U.S. intelligence community and military. So it draws upon that and essentially plays out what are the type of threats that loom, and how will certain actors be trying to avoid detection. But the big shift that is playing out, and we're starting to get a little taste of it right now, and we hit really hard in the book, was something that was arguably pioneered with Stuxnet. What made Stuxnet the arguably first real cyber weapon was that it caused kinetic change in the world, the same way that a bullet or a blade caused physical change in the world, as opposed to all the other past types of cyber attacks. That's what Stuxnet did to Iranian nuclear research, and that of course we've seen move forward with people going after for example the Ukrainian power grid, et cetera. And we've started to see little tastes of this, of showing off, hey, I can go after GPS for a drone, or other people playing with, doing kind of fun things to Teslas, or we've seen tests going after medical devices. And so what the book does is plays forward, okay, where is the internet headed? The internet is headed to more and more IoT and more intelligent IoT. So it's not just things lashed up, whether it's refrigerator, heater for your water to city's traffic grid, but it's also more and more intelligent, where it is observing you as an individual, but also the system wide, and then making reactions to that. Oh, by the way, this is a really good thing. For example, intelligent IoT is probably how we work our way through the challenges of global climate change. It's only if you get an intelligent, smart grid and smart city that you're going to get, real energy efficiency. But it also, going back to what we were talking about before, huge issues of privacy. Who owns that data? How are they potentially manipulating your behavior? But also it means that the attacks that go after them will not just be about watching you through the camera. It will be about causing physical change. And it might be where ransomware is headed, where it's, I'm not locking down your files, I'm taking over something physical, and you're going to have to pay me to get it back. It might be a car, a city bus.
There was examples of that with televisions, smart TVs.
Yep.
The ransomware
so,
TV. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it might be holding something ransom, or it might be back to a prior question, feeding bad data. Giving GPS, it's setting it 50 meters off so that the system thinks it's somewhere than it actually is, which could cause some crashes. It might be changing the sensor data in terms of something like temperature, which could cause a system to short out, to even catch fire. And again, you might be doing that on an individual level. You might do it at a citywide level. I'm giving a little bit too much away, but I think
I think that
will be like, yep. And that's one of the things, it's not just me dreaming up these. It's pulling from either things that people have shown off, or they're the kind of things that security engineers talk about over drinks. So, one of the things that plays out in the book was basically from talking with someone who works in related to city infrastructure and upgrading certain systems, and they made certain compromises, as often plays out. Security came behind efficiency and convenience, and the result is they baked in some incredible vulnerabilities. And what's funny is there's literally just 4 systems to alter if you gain in. I don't reveal which ones they are, but as he and I are talking, his wife yells out, "You don't know him well enough. Don't tell him which ones."
Yeah, I think there's more of an opportunity than ever before for attackers to cause physical changes in the world through hacking computer systems, essentially. And my big concern is the more technology we adopt, the more we remove potentially some of those physical safeguards in, like you said, Peter, in terms of convenience and operational efficiency. And that's been a problem for a long time. It's been one that's been highlighted. Certainly war games showed us that removing physical safeguards could be a really bad thing. And, that could be a trend that certainly continues. We've talked a lot about, for example, printer security, and could you cause a printer to catch fire? Well, it turns out there are physical safeguards in all printers that I'm aware of that prevent that from happening. But what happens as technology evolves, and more of that, as we've seen, moves from hardware and people into more things like software?
Yeah, there's 2 things that you hit that I think are really interesting. One is, in many ways, what the book's trying to communicate is that we're repeating all of the early mistakes that we made with security of the internet in its first form. We're basically replicating so many of those same mistakes when it comes over to moving into the Internet of Things and and intelligent things. And that's in everything from the technical side of not baking security in to people outside the security community not understanding the importance of it. And so they are often making decisions that going to create greater risk. You go back to one of the questions about timeline. The Secretary of the Treasury said that we don't have to think about the issues of AI, automation, et cetera, for, quote, 50 to 100 years, end quote. That is insane. What? That is insanely wrong. And so, that's part of what we're after. And then the second, you referenced war games, and that shows actually the power of fiction, because the very first U.S. government cybersecurity policy came out of Ronald Reagan watching war games and then going, could that happen? We ought to do something about it. And he went to his staff and said, find this out for me. And they basically, came back and said, well, what's in the movie can't happen. But yes, there are these, things called hacks and hackers and the like. The very first U.S. strategy came out of that. And
I fact checked that with some of my close friends. And the general consensus is that absolutely happened, that Ronald Reagan watched war games and went to his staff and gave a very detailed description of the plot. And one of the things that backs that up is that Ronald Reagan came from Hollywood, right? He was a movie buff. So
look, and so, it happens all the time. It also scarily happens in a bad way. I used to host actually a podcast many years back where we would interview cybersecurity leaders. And at the end of it, I was always asked them, what cybersecurity movie or TV show is your favorite? And you could, people, Sneakers, for example, lots of people said that, great movie. And I had a couple of members of Congress on, and they referenced Die Hard 4 as teaching them about cybersecurity. And I went, oh gosh. I guess what I'm getting at here is, by the project being entertaining, but also grounded, we hope it has that kind of positive effect rather than giving people a bum steer.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to read this book. Actually, to listen to the book, because it's available for pre-order today when we're recording this in audio format, which is awesome. So
great. Well, thanks again for having me on.
And the website for the book, Peter?
So it's burninbook.com. So BURNIN book.com. That's the book website, but people can also get it pretty much everywhere that books are available, whether it's the big platforms, the Amazons and Barnes and Nobles, to if you want to support your local bookstore, there's IndieBound, or it's called Bookshop, and they funnel through those bookstores as well.
Fantastic. Peter, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
All right, take care.
That will conclude the show for this evening. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. Over and out.